Professional creatives know that the process of creation changes them. Podcasters aren't immune from this reality, and what we say has just as much control over us as we have control over what we say. Hello and welcome to another Podcast Pontifications with me, Evo Terra. Hear the voice? I've been fighting along illness. Apologies for missing the show yesterday, but the good news is I'm doing much better now. During my convalescence over the weekend, I was reading a book written by a friend of mine, and in it was a throwaway phrase that I thought was cute and clever, which really stuck with me. And that throwaway phrase, which was cute and clever, is this. "What am I doing with my life?" he said. "What is my life doing with me?" Now, that kind of was funny and interesting. I hadn't thought about it in that particular angle. But I thought, what if we swap out the word life with the word podcast? So instead of what am I doing with my podcast? And we have lots of material on that, right? How do you make a better podcast? There's a lot of that. But there's a lot less about the last half of that sentence, which is, let me rephrase it just slightly here. What is your podcast doing to you? Because having a podcast changes you. It changes me. It changes everyone, right? At least most of us, right? I guess it can't change everyone. There's always exceptions to the rules. But, I think most people, if you're really introspective and you look at this, you will say that your time spent podcasting has had an impact on you personally. It just has. Now, there are lots of ways that the podcast can change people like you, like me, but I think we can focus in on two and probably bucketize it into two various things. The first one being resource allocation, right? Resource allocation, which really breaks down to two things, money and time. It's going to change, having a podcast will change the amount of money that you spend. Now, some get away with doing things on the super, super, super cheap, and congrats all you frugal people, as long as you're making shows that sound good quality. That's great. But as many people get deeper into the podcasting space, we wind up doing silly things like buying 15 microphones that we don't need. Speaking from personal experience, right? We go to conferences, even virtual conferences, as Podcast Movement 2020 virtual is happening right now, or lots of other things that we invest in. We spend money on having people do the things that we don't want to do. That's just a natural thing. Well, when you spend money differently, it's a change, right? It's a change to the overall you, because you are how much money that you spend as well. It changes the resource allocation of time, as mentioned. If you're not spending money to outsource a variety of tasks like writing your episode details or paying someone to engineer or master your episodes or whatever else, then you're spending time. You're spending time doing that. And that's time away from your other things in your life, your friends, your family. Just like with money previously, the money you spend on podcasting is money you're not spending on other things like the mortgage, rent, groceries, or fun things. It doesn't have to be all dire and weird here, Evo, right? But these things do change. You change your resource allocation, so therefore just having a podcast is making a change on you. It also changes it changes you personally through the personality. If you think about it, when you get behind the microphone, we've all said, or many of us have said, I should say, podcasting is the most authentic medium. We are speaking our true, authentic selves. And I don't disagree with that. I mean, I can give you several examples. I used to live an example of being someone on a podcast very different than my regular personality. But a lot of people still try to be as authentic. I think most people try to be as authentic as they possibly can when they get behind a podcast microphone. But still, just the process of having a podcast, being a podcaster, being a voice that other people hear, enough episodes in, you'll start to actually change your personality a bit. Sometimes that new personality, that persona you put on when you get behind the microphone, starts to leak out into the real world, in real life, as the kids used to say when we were kids. Do you like that person? Do you like that person when it's not behind the microphone, when that person becomes the person influencing others in your life? Do other people in your life like that person? Now, maybe they do. Maybe that person is more energetic and upbeat and more extroverted. There's nothing wrong with being introverted, but in the event that it does make you more interesting to people typically when you're extroverted, although I'm not trying to make a judgment call on any of that. These don't have to be bad things, but nonetheless, they certainly might be and might make an impact here on you. Because oftentimes it is a bad thing. Because you don't feel like you're in control. In order to be successful at this thing we call podcasting, you're making sacrifices, you're making changes, you're making compromises, because this is what I need to do to get more of X, whether X is more listeners or more sponsors or more advertising dollars or more connections. That might not be, the person you have to be to do those things might not be the person that you really want to be. So, what do we do? What's our path forward if we recognize, well, actually, let me just talk about it a different way. Forget if we recognize things. We have to first recognize things. I think our path forward is, even if you're going, what are you talking about, Evo? This has never happened to me. I can't say my podcast would change. Well, I've got some things I would suggest that you do. Well, first is double check that. I mean, if this is the first time you're thinking about something like this, spend some brain cycles, checking in with yourself, really analyzing yourself. When you get behind the microphone today or tomorrow, whenever it happens to be, think about yourself. Think about the person you are before you're on the mic and after you're off of the mic. Have they changed? Were they different? If you're exactly the same thing, then you're probably on the safe side. But I would also suggest you do the second thing, which is ask those people around you now, even if you don't see this as a problem. Check in with your friends and your family who know you have a podcast and just ask, hey, have you noticed a change in me since I started doing this show? They'll probably be honest with you if you ask it that way. If you say, do you think I'm a bigger dick now than I was? Then that's going to be a different thing. Just ask. Have they noticed a change in who you are personally? Your personality, has it been modified? I mean, who knows? Maybe this doesn't have to be bad. Maybe the podcast is actually making you a better person, whether real or imaginary. Maybe it's actually working in your favor. That's a good thing. But if it's not a good thing, then the time to take control of that is now. The time to take control and become in charge of your podcast is now, before it takes complete and total control of you. Now, a few things before I take off. Number one, let's not forget, Evo's long winter's nap is coming up. I take off the months of November and December. If you would like to have your voice added to Podcast Pontifications, if there's a topic you wish to pontificate about, get in touch with me, evo@simpler.media. And if you like the things that I have to say and want to support me even during my downtime over a couple of months, please go to buymeacoffee.com/evoterra. And what's the last thing? Oh, right, the last thing is tell a friend. Tell someone you know, another working podcaster, about Podcast Pontifications. Maybe there's someone who is having a positive change or a negative change in their life since they've started podcasting. They need to hear this episode. Send this to them with a personal note telling them that they should listen to Podcast Pontifications. The only way this show grows is when other podcasters like yourself share it. So, thanks for that. Thanks for waiting through me on this sickness. Hopefully tomorrow my voice is much better, and I shall be back tomorrow with yet another Podcast Pontifications. Cheers!